The courtroom was already in session when Naomi Ellis stepped through the towering double doors, the soft tap of her heels echoing against the polished tile. She moved with a quiet determination, her sharp gaze sweeping the room as she slid into a seat near the front. The weight of the moment pressed against her, but her expression remained steady, calm, unreadable. At the defense table, her younger brother, Marcus Ellis, sat stiffly beside his attorney. His fingers were laced together, resting against the cold surface of the table, his jaw clenched in tense resolve. He was a young black man with short, neatly trimmed hair and eyes that carried the exhaustion of someone who had learned too soon how unfair the world could be. Naomi's heart ached at the sight of him. Marcus had always been the dreamer, the one who believed that if he worked hard and did right, justice would follow. But today, that belief had been stripped away, replaced by the bitter truth of a system designed to break him. Presiding over the case was Judge Howard Grayson, an older white man with sunken eyes and a permanent frown. He barely lifted his gaze as Naomi entered, his dark robe draped over his shoulders like armor. It was meant to represent fairness, but in this room, it felt more like a barrier, a shield protecting power from accountability. The case: the state versus Marcus Ellis. The charges: resisting arrest and obstruction of justice. A flimsy accusation, one that barely held weight. Yet the prosecutor was pushing it with relentless determination. The arrest had happened days earlier. Marcus had been walking home from work when officers stopped him, claiming he matched the description of a suspect from an altercation at a convenience store. When he had calmly asked why he was being detained, things escalated. The officers accused him of noncompliance, and within moments, he was forced to the ground, handcuffed, and thrown into the back of a squad car. Now he sat before a jury, fighting for his freedom over a crime he never committed. Naomi settled into her seat, smoothing out the tailored blazer over her olive green blouse. She had not come to be a silent observer. The prosecutor, Wesley Kincaid, was a clean-cut man in a pressed navy suit, his demeanor exuding arrogance. Rising from his chair, he adjusted his tie before addressing the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and rehearsed. "This case is about upholding the law. The defendant, Marcus Ellis, was given direct orders by law enforcement officers and chose to disregard them. His actions were deliberate. He resisted a lawful command, and in doing so, he obstructed justice. The facts are clear, and personal opinions have no place in this courtroom." Naomi's fingers curled into a fist as she listened. This was the same tired narrative used time and time again against men like Marcus, if he had only complied. Kincaid continued, painting Marcus as uncooperative, using vague but suggestive language to make him seem like a threat. Naomi recognized the tactic immediately. Subtle fear-mongering, a play designed to nudge the jury toward suspicion. At the defense table, Marcus's attorney, Robert Dawson, a seasoned lawyer with salt and pepper hair and a composed demeanor, finally stood. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice firm yet measured. He turned toward the jury, adjusting his stance. "Let's focus on what's actually at stake. My client, Marcus Ellis, was on his way home from work. He was unarmed, had no criminal record, and posed no threat to anyone. Yet he was stopped without cause, accused based on nothing more than assumption." Kincaid scoffed, but Dawson ignored him. "My client did not resist. He simply asked the question, 'Why am I being stopped?' And for that, he was thrown to the ground. Now, I want you to consider something. If Marcus Ellis looked different, would we even be here today?" A ripple of unease passed through the courtroom. Judge Grayson lifted his gavel, striking it twice against the wood. "I won't tolerate unnecessary theatrics, Mr. Dawson," he said, his voice thick with disinterest. Dawson took a measured breath and nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." Naomi studied the judge carefully. She had researched him before coming here. Grayson had a reputation, a history of handing down harsh sentences against black defendants. He was known as a tough-on-crime judge, yet his biases were not difficult to trace. The first witness was called. "Officer Eric Weston, please take the stand," the bailiff announced. A heavy-set officer with a shaved head and an impassive expression approached, placing his right hand on the Bible before taking his seat. Kincaid wasted no time. "Officer Weston, can you describe the events of that evening?" Weston cleared his throat. "We responded to a disturbance at a convenience store. The suspect was described as a black male wearing dark clothing. When we saw Mr. Ellis, he matched the description." Dawson tilted his head. "My client was wearing khaki slacks and a button-up shirt. Do you believe that matches dark clothing?" Weston hesitated. "Well, in a fast-moving situation, you rely on instinct." Naomi pressed her lips together. "Instinct always seemed to mean targeting black men first and asking questions later. Did Mr. Ellis display any aggression?" Dawson continued. Weston shifted slightly. "He was uncooperative." "In what way?" "He questioned why he was being stopped." Naomi almost laughed. "Since when was questioning your own detainment a crime?" Judge Grayson barely reacted, occasionally glancing up with indifference. Yet, Naomi noticed that whenever she shifted in her seat, his eyes flickered toward her for just a moment longer, assessing, measuring. She knew his type. As the trial unfolded, it became increasingly clear. This case was not just about Marcus. It was about a system that saw black men as guilty before they even had a chance to speak. It was about power, about perception, about a rigged game. But what neither Judge Grayson, nor Wesley Kincaid, nor the officers realized was that Naomi Ellis was not the type to watch in silence. And when the time came, they would all learn exactly who they were dealing with. As the final witness stepped down from the stand, the courtroom settled into an uneasy silence. The weight of the trial hung thick in the air, pressing against every person in the room. Naomi Ellis sat still, her heart pounding, her hands clasped together in her lap. She had spent every moment of this trial absorbing every expression, every word, every subtle move made by the prosecution and the judge. And now, as both sides prepared for their closing arguments, she knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. Prosecutor Wesley Kincaid rose from his seat, smoothing down the front of his suit before stepping toward the jury box. His expression was composed, his voice deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have seen in this courtroom is clear-cut. The defendant, Marcus Ellis, refused to follow the lawful commands of the police. He chose to resist, to escalate the situation, forcing the officers to take necessary action. The law is not open to interpretation. It exists to maintain order. And today, I ask you to uphold that order by delivering a guilty verdict." Naomi exhaled slowly. It was the same tired script, wrapped in legal jargon and polished rhetoric. The kind that was designed to disguise injustice under the illusion of due process. Then, Robert Dawson stood. He straightened his tie and faced the jury. "This isn't about law and order. It's about perception." Marcus Ellis was stopped, accused, and arrested. Not for what he did, but for how he looked. He paused. The prosecution claims he resisted, but all he did was ask, "Why am I being stopped?" For that, he was thrown to the ground and put on trial. Dawson's gaze was firm. The law should protect, not punish the innocent. If justice matters, there's only one verdict, not guilty. Silence filled the courtroom. Now justice had to decide its course.